So in this video, I'm going to show you how to set up a terrain based on the previous video. We have a plane, we have a person here that we can walk around with. But the scene is kind of dull and we would probably like more of a landscape kind of thing. So if you right click in your hierarchy here and go to 3D object and you choose terrain, it's going to add a huge plane essentially in the game. So because we are currently getting this flickering thing here, this is essentially because two objects are trying to be in the same space at once, so the renderer can't really figure out which one to show. So I'm going to click my plane and I'm going to just move it ever so slightly down so that it's just below the actual terrain here. So I'm going to click the terrain, and as you can see, it's absolutely massive. You can make it even bigger if you want to, because this is grid based. So all of these grids that you see around here will be able to be also terrain. And you have those options over here in the inspector. But first of all, I'm going to click the second option right here. And I have a lot of different things that I can choose from. In this case, I would like to paint a texture so that we can start by adding a bit of color to it. As you can see, there is currently no terrain layers because I haven't imported any package that has any terrain layers or anything like that. So I'm going to make my own. So I'm going to click the edit terrain layers. I'm going to click create layer. And I'm just going to choose any of these pictures that I have in my current setup. I have one called grass, so I'm going to start with that. So as you can see, it has added grass to my plane, and it's also just tiled. I would like this to be tiled in a bit of a different way, maybe stretch out the grass a tiny bit. So I'm going to click the new layer here. And as you can see, the size is currently set to 2 by 2. If we set that to, let's say, just 20 by 20, we get a bit more rougher detail in the surface. It's still tiled, but there are some fixes that we can talk about later as well. I'm going to add another layer, so edit terrain layers, create a layer. In this case, I'm just going to choose some dirt that I have here. So now I also have a dirt layer. This one I'm also going to change to 20 by 20, just so that I'm sure that they kind of have the same scale to them. But as you can see here, this is essentially just like painting in Photoshop or any other painting program. I now have a brush that is controlled by the brush size and the opacity. The opacity is the hardness of the brush. So currently it's set to very low, meaning I'm only getting a slight little hint of it unless I click multiple times. Whereas if I were to click 100, it's just going to be one rough stamp of that texture there. And of course, the brush size defines the size of the brush that I'm painting with, and you have some specific brush types as well. So if you need a star or something, you can get that as well. This is one thing of the terrain painting options. Now we would like to raise and lower the terrain so that we can get a bit of mountains and stuff like that going. So up here in the drop down, instead of the paint texture, we will be raising or lowering the terrain. So click that one, please. Choose a brush that you kind of like. This is okay. By the way, you can also add a new brush, and it's just a black and white image. So if you have something specific that you need, you can just add that here. I'm going to make the brush a bit bigger than this and maybe a bit of extra opacity. And now I can start building some mountains and some valleys and all of that stuff. There is one thing that you need to keep in mind. Let's say I want to go down. I hold Shift and I paint. This is pushing the mountains down. But I'm not really allowed to go below ground. If you ever need to be at a medium height or distance and you want to go down, you need to have the entire terrain raised first. A quick thing that you can do here is you can go to set height, and then you can just set the height to, let's say, 20 meters high, and then you can do a flatten all, meaning that this entire thing is now up in the air by 20 meters. So I would select my move tool, move it down a bit so that we can jump onto it at least with our character, and then go into, instead of the set height, you can now raise or lower terrain, because now I will be able to hold my Shift button and go below ground. So now I can also create some valleys. So essentially I have a bit more control, but again, I can of course only go those 20 meters down. So if you need it to be higher, then, well, you need to kind of set that higher. So that's the basics of the terrain. There's also other options like painting holes and stuff like that you can play around with. You can also smooth out any jagged edges if they look a bit too unnatural. But I would just like to show you how we can now take our player here, move around in the scene, and also add a bit of tiny physics to an object to push it around. So let's start by selecting our player, go to the player armature where all the settings are, and I would like to change the movement speed of this player. So I'm going to change his standard movement speed to 10 and his sprint to 15. I'm also going to change his jump height to 5 because then I can jump pretty high, maybe even up on top of these mountains and everything. So this means that now if I go into play mode, he is faster than before. He can jump pretty high, so I'm pretty sure I can scale everything. And if I sprint, I also move a lot faster. I can also almost fly. This also means that it has a max slope limit, in this case of 45. But because I can jump so high, I can jump up on these mountains. So it's kind of a good, I would almost call it a debugging tool to figure out if your mountains work in the scale of your game. But for now, this player here is fine. I would now like to add a bit of a physics object that I can push around. Let's say we go to the edge of the map here. I'm just going to focus. I want to place a ball right here, just essentially a football. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to 3D object, and I'm going to add a sphere. So a sphere is just a round 3D geometry that we can do with whatever we want, but because it's Unity standard, it has a collider on it already. We'll cover colliders in high detail later. It just means that it will be able to collide with other objects without falling through them or moving through them essentially. So in this case here, I would like this to be a football. I actually have a quick football texture, so that's kind of cool and convenient. I go to add component over here and I would like to add a new component. So this component here, well, Unity has a lot of components, but in this case, I would like to add a physics component. So a component that enables physics for this object. I know for a fact that this is the rigid body. So RIG will give you the rigid body options, and it's the top one here. So not the 2D version, but the standard rigid body. So what this does, it just tells this object that now you can interact with physics. So in this case, that means that it's just going to fall and it has a mass of 1. I actually don't know what that means, maybe 1 kilogram, I'm not entirely sure. But you can play around with some of these settings. It's gonna make it like a more heavy ball or a lighter ball if you want that. If you look into the player itself right here, it has a basic rigid body push script on it, meaning that this guy here should be able to push an object, but currently those push layers are set to nothing. So this means that if I go into play mode, the ball will fall down and lay on the ground there. If I try to go into that, I'm not able to push it because, well, I don't have that script activated, and I have the script activated, but I don't have the layer activated. So I need to put the ball here on a specific layer. If you look at the inspector, you have both something called tags and something called layers. These are very conveniently to use with like programming, so that you can say this is the enemy tag or the player tag. And you can also separate things into layers, like shootable layers and stuff. So I'm gonna add a new layer. So I'm gonna click default layer here and add layer. And I'm just gonna add layer 6 in this case. I'm gonna call it ball, click enter. And now I need to go back and click the ball again and change that layer to ball. Now I have set this sphere with this rigid body and everything to be on the ball layer. This is the only object in the entire game here that is on that layer. So now I can click my player armature. I can go to that basic rigid body push script, and I can change the push layers from nothing to ball. I also need to activate can push. For some odd reason, even though I changed this doesn't default. So yeah. Strength 1.1, if you make it higher, you're essentially gonna make yourself like Ronaldo or whatever. You can kick this ball to Never Never Land, but that's for you to try. For now, this is just a physics ball here, and if I walk into it, I will be able to push it around. I can also sprint with it, so that now I can, well, push this ball through essentially the entire game. I should also be able to stop it again though. No. Oh, kinda. So this concludes the setup of the terrain, the player controller, and some interactable objects. Thank you for watching, everyone.